Lamborghini as a brand have a huge following, but up until the mid-noughties, they never really had a huge amount of motorsport pedigree. They had single-make championships and entered into F1 in different ways, but they never really left much of an impression, which for a brand that created some of the most crazy and insane vehicles to come out of the 80s and 90s is perhaps quite surprising. However, having been taken over by Audi, the GT1 category of race car was where the brand were hoping to have a larger amount of notoriety in the sport, and hopefully through winning. The car would be developed around the recently revealed Murcielago, and was created by the German company called Reiter Engineering. Reiter was a partner of Lamborghini from 2000, from when the company was first launched, but the Italian firm and Audi Sport would be helping in the development of this new car. The Lambos were always operated on by good privateer outfits, one of which is the rather famous J-Lock team from Japan, which made runs at Le Mans with the car. However, in this video, we'll be going over what happened to the Murcielago in North America. Dick Barber Racing had had a lot of recent success in the American Le Mans series, and they would return to the ALMS for 2004 in a partnership with businessman Tracy Crone to create Crone Barber Racing. The team would be aiming to enter 2 Lamborghinis after the first round of the season at Sebring, as the cars wouldn't be delivered until about a couple of months before the second round at Mid-Ohio. Dick Barber said during the announcement, "There is factory support for the program. This project is a multi-year deal, so although I might be expecting a lot to see the Italian cars right on the ALMS GTS pace immediately, longer term, these cars should be real contenders." Meanwhile, Tracy Crone said, "We're going to field a first-class racing team, and we look forward to mixing it up with the other competitors in what we consider to be the finest professional sports car racing series in the world." So the 6-litre V12-engined rear-wheel drive converted Lamborghinis would be entered for Mid-Ohio, with clearly some expectations that they would, in the years to come, be a very competitive racing machine. Although, like almost every newly created race car, expectations for the first year were to be modest, to learn, to improve, and to become more competitive as the year went on. It was almost a miracle that they had 2 cars in the first place, with both machines arriving from Germany within a week before the race, and a rush to get the cars ready. Meanwhile, the drivers for both entries were as follows. In the number 5, the very experienced Peter Cox and David Brabham, whilst in the number 6 was Tracy Crone, and for this race, Scott Maxwell. However, an incident in practice left the 6 car with some damage, and whilst it was repairable, it didn't have the required parts to fix it, so was withdrawn. The 5 car though would race, and it would be just over 3 seconds off in qualifying, but it would have exactly the race it needed. Decent speed given how they'd worked for very little time on the car, and a lot of data gathered as to where the car could improve. It was on to the next round at Lime Rock, where it seems like 2 cars were entered, but only 1 turned up. It ended up being the Crone Maxwell driven car that didn't turn up, with David Brabham and Peter Cox representing the team. The car would end up qualifying over 2 seconds off the GTS pole. The race was going by fairly smoothly once again, but contact with the Saleen would put the Murcielago into a half spin, with Cox at the wheel. The resultant suspension damage would lose them several laps, ending up 57 laps off of the class winner. For Sonoma a few weeks later, both cars would be racing, although Scott Maxwell wasn't able to race alongside Tracy, so they got a late replacement in Dave McEntee, who was at the time the chief instructor at the track's driving school, which probably isn't too bad of a person to pick in this scenario. Their car was built around a new chassis, but for this round, the Lambos had a few updates to them, such as a new rear spoiler, a new sway bar, and updates to the rear suspension. This wasn't going to suddenly make them class-winning contenders, but steps hopefully towards that goal. They were still off in terms of qualifying pace, but that ultimately didn't matter in the race, as for the Peter Cox and David Brabham car, the differential had no more oil in it, ultimately putting the car out of the race after 15 laps in a cloud of smoke. Whilst for the number 6 car, it apparently made contact with the number 4 Corvette, with the Chevrolet coming off worse. Yet despite ending up 12 laps behind the class winner, through simply having not as many issues as others, the number 6 Lambo finished second in GTS. Nick Johnson would join Tracy for Portland, but ultimately for both the Murcielagos, it wasn't a great weekend. The 6 would have the same issue in practice for Portland as it did in the 5 car during the race at Sonoma, and then in Saturday practice, the 6 car would spin and collect the teammate car. Luckily, both cars would be repaired for qualifying, before setting a time in the number 5 car's case just over 2 seconds off the GTS pole. Whilst in the race, both cars retired from gearbox and suspension issues, although which car had what issue, I don't know for sure. Then for Mosport, things got worse. On Friday practice, a suspension part broke, and its replacement didn't fit, which they tried to machine to fit, but during running, it started to deform, and was only going to go downhill from there, and with the lack of parts they had, they ultimately ended up withdrawing from the Canadian round. After that, it was ultimately decided that instead of racing at Road America, they would spend the time testing and developing. Dick Barber said about the thought behind it, "By missing the Road America race, we get a valuable 6-week window before both cars return to the series at Petit Le Mans. The longest and most important event will enter this year." For the Petit Le Mans, Nick Johnson would join the regular 5 crew for this round, whilst Cronin Maxwell would be joined by Joe Fox, a track instructor at Road Atlanta. For qualifying, the 5 car would be over 2 seconds off the GTS pole, but for the race the car would have an oil-induced spin which would damage the Lambo to the point of retirement, whilst the 6 car had a split oil cooler during the race, but would get to the end having completed 313 laps, 63 behind the GTS winner. A few days after the Petit Le Mans though, the ALMS program was discontinued, before the final round at Laguna Seca. Tracy Crone said about the decision, "We always knew the Lamborghini would need some development, being a new race car, but we went into this program having been promised a level of factory support that in my opinion was not delivered." Crone Barber negotiated with Lamborghini ahead of the season, and reached an agreement in good faith. Crone Barber has honoured all of its commitments. Unfortunately, Lamborghini didn't provide the draft contract until the day before delivery of the second car, and in my opinion this failed to reflect the original agreement. Discussions with Lamborghini at Petit Le Mans last weekend failed to resolve this. And just like that, the rather tumultuous effort was over. A big disappointment of course, but probably given the on-track performance and how generally the program was going, when you take into account how hectic everything was to get ready for Mid-Ohio, the situation regarding spare parts, the withdrawal midway through Mosport, it was not an ideal situation. The team certainly tried their hardest to do things as well as they could, with experienced drivers who could help in getting more speed on the car. However, given the tight time frame of when they received the cars, how close together a lot of the rounds were on the calendar, and with the damage the cars had picked up and required repairs necessary, it meant that certain updates weren't possible for a while, such as being able to change the brakes from steel to carbon fibre. Ultimately, we'd never see a Murcielago compete in the LMS ever again. However, we would see another Writer Engineering Lamborghini compete in the series, in a new decade. The GT2 class of the LMS would see 2 Gallardo LP560s be entered by West Racing, although ultimately we'd only end up seeing 1 car compete at the first round in Sebring. The car would be driven by former Minardi F1 test driver and Champ Car racer Nicky Pastorelli, and then Super GT and GT1 pilot Dominic Schrager. Grand Am driver Brett Sandberg was on the entry list for them for round 1 at Sebring. However, they weren't really on the pace during testing, and they wouldn't set a time in qualifying. The race though would end after just 10 laps. A broken left rear wheel was the reason, and as they didn't seem to know why, they retired the car. Sebring being its usual brutal self. They then arrive at Long Beach and set a qualifying time just under 5 seconds off the GT pole time. A quiet race for the Gallardo, but were 6 laps behind the class winner. And that was that. The team wouldn't do any more rounds with the car, but they would return in 2013 with a Ferrari 458 GT effort and a partnership with Alex Yob Racing. Ultimately, these efforts were never really all that competitive. However, that's not to say that Lamborghini machines can't be successful in American endurance racing, as the Huracan GT3 have earned a lot of class victories in IMSA, including in a number of the Crown Jewel races. It's just a shame that the Murcielago and Gallardo never showed the same sort of competitiveness. They're still awesome cars, but had they have shown a bit more potential early on, they may have become a bit more of a mainstay in their respective classes. However, what are your opinions on these cars? Say in the comment section down below. And whilst you're at it, if you did enjoy this video, then I'd be incredibly appreciative if you did hit the like and subscribe buttons. However, that is going to be it for this video, so thank you very much for watching. And until the next video, be kind to each other and enjoy the rest of your day.